She's got another DUI. She's putting herself at risk. She's putting other people at risk. She could kill someone. If she goes to jail, it's supposed to be 90 days. But here's the consequence. It goes to 2 weeks. And before she even gets out of the jail, she makes a deal for an interview and gets paid $1 million when she gets out for the interview. What do you think the chances of her changing when her bad behavior gets her $1 million, and I don't know if she even makes that for that much time of acting at this stage? What do you think the chances are when people around her say it's not your fault, it's not fair, they treat you unfairly? As long as we have the decision that we're not responsible, it's not our fault, we can't change anything. We have no power. So I don't know by the time you watch this if Lindsay will have changed, but if she did, it'll be because the enablers are gone, she's taken responsibility, and she's found something she values more than attention and money for bad behavior. Now, it's easy to look at that with her, but what about you and I? Where are you and I addicted to our problems? Where are you and I reinforced? So many people, when they have a big problem, listen, if things are going well, you say, oh, it's going so great. Your friends go, well, that's great. And after a while, they go, well, easy for you. But if you got a problem, people go, hey, I understand, and they connect with you. Where do we get addicted to our problems? If you want to make a new choice, if you want to make a new decision today, if you want to have a breakthrough in some area of your life, you got to give up the story that it's not your fault, and you got to give up the attention and the love and the connection and the commiserating that comes with it with other human beings. Here's how you change. 5 simple, quick steps, and then I'm going to give you a little tool that if you want to, you can go online and really make a change with. If you're going to change your life, step 1, I don't care if something has happened to you. You know, somebody has spilled oil all over where you fish. It's horrific. It's disgusting how they've dealt with it, but it's happened and you got to deal with it. Something's happened. Someone in your family's been injured. You've lost your job. I don't care what the problem is. If you're in a crisis, step number 1, see it as it is, but don't see it worse than it is. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean be Mr. or Miss positive thinking. By now, if you spend any time with me, you know I'm not about that. I'm not here to tell you, go to that garden and chant, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds. Doing affirmations is not going to change your life. You got to go see where the weeds are and pull them out. My point is simple. You got to see what the problem is, but you can't make it so horrific that you just give up. Today, this is the first generation in almost 100 years of Americans who now believe, the majority of Americans now believe, that the quality of life for themselves and their kids in the future is going to be worse than the past. They have, in other words, nothing to look forward to. 63% of the US as of today. Wow. When you start thinking there is no future, you go into what we call learned helplessness, a place where you just kind of give up. And if you get to that place of giving up, then you have no power over your life. That's when people get depressed. That's when people do crazy, stupid things. That's when people want to turn to drugs or alcohol or sometimes suicide or just total frustration and anger, and their life starts to do the opposite of a breakthrough. It becomes completely stuck and in pain or in ongoing suffering. If you and I are going to break out of that, we got to see it as it is. We're not here to be positive thinking people. You got to see what's really going on. But if you're overweight, you can't say to yourself, well, I'm big boned. That's not why you're overweight. You're overweight because you don't work out, you eat certain things, you eat Cheetos all day long watching TV. I don't know what it is you do, but I know it's not just because you're big boned. You don't want to make it so it's outside your control or you can't change it. So see it as it is, but don't see it worse than it is so that you have no reason to try. Does that make sense? That's the first step. Step 2, get to the real truth and deal with it. Don't just see it as it is and not worse than it is. Don't just like balance it, but now get to the truth. I mean, listen, if the truth is you've been trying to get a job for 2 years and you truly have worked every day in a particular industry, and the number of jobs in that industry have shrunk down, and you really aren't getting that job, then you might have to look at the truth. The truth is you might have to retool. You might have to say, gosh, you know, the industry I'm in is gone. I mean, gross, simplistic example, but for years, vinyl records were around for 85 years. And it was a gigantic industry. And things came and went. During the vinyl record time, what happened? Well, there was, remember those 8-track tapes? Are you ancient enough to remember those things? Maybe you know somebody remembers those things. These big boxes, you push them in and out. Yeah, 8-tracks came and went, vinyl records were still here. And then cassette tapes came, right? And cassette tapes were smaller and more compact and more convenient and more seemingly indestructible. And they came over here and vinyl records were still selling like crazy. If you had a job in vinyl records, you kept it. But then a little thing came along called the CD. And when that happened, Almost overnight, you saw an entire industry that's been around almost a century was gone. If you were the guy that worked in the vinyl record factory and knew everything about it, it was the second generation, didn't matter. It was over. And now we laugh about a CD, right? Because everything in this digital world you can have instantly. Who wants to put it on a CD? Pretty rare, still available. In vinyl records, maybe there's a small market of people that are collectors, but it's gone. My point is, if you're in the vinyl record business, you got to tell yourself the truth. You got to see it as it is, not worse than it is, but you also got to get the truth and deal with it. You got to deal with the cards you're dealt. You're going to have to retool. You're going to have to change something. You might have to move. If you live in the Gulf, and I don't support anything that's happened there, who could? It's unconscionable what's happened with BP. But if you live in the Gulf and you're a third generation fisherman, and you fish for oysters and they're dead, you better get to the truth. Are they going to be dead for 2 years or 10 or 20 to the best of your ability? And you might say, well, I can't do anything else. I can't. I'm a third generation. This is all I know. Yes, you can. Get to the truth and deal with it. Deal with the card you're dealt with. You got to deal with it, sure, I'm sure legally, but in the meantime, you got to take care of your family. I'm not saying this off the cuff easy because I've been in those situations where it's impossible, it's unjust, it's wrong, but I still got to deal with it just like you. Am I making sense? It's like, you might say, I've lived here my life. You might have to move. You might have to fish someplace else. You might have to, I know you still got to deal with all the consequences, but you got to take back control of your life. There are unjust things that happen, but you got to take control. Easy for me to say, I'm not sitting in your shoes, I get that. But who hasn't experienced some form of injustice, someplace? Who's not dealt with something unfair? Who's not dealt with something that wasn't meant to be unfair, but it affected your entire life, your career, your finances, whatever? You got to tell yourself the truth, and you got to get to those, dealing with the reality right now. The longer you wait, the longer the crisis will be. If you're having an economic crisis, got to deal with it. Got to downsize, right size, do whatever it takes. And I say, okay, Tony, well, so far you're telling me don't allow myself to make it so bad I don't try, see it as is, but don't make it worse than it is, and you're telling me get to the truth and deal with it. Well, that's nice, but how do I do that? Maybe the third step, more than just getting the role model, maybe to be more specific, is get a vision first. Get a vision and get strong. That's what I think your third step should be. You first tell yourself the truth, yes, see it as it is, not worse than it is, tell yourself the truth and deal with it, but the way to deal with it is say, what am I gonna go for? There's gotta be a compelling future. I've gotta come up with a vision for my life, or a vision for my relationship. I've had terrible relationships, nothing's worked. Tell yourself the truth. I've made poor choices, or I've told myself stories and gave myself excuses, or I've not had the courage, whatever it is, get to the truth, and then get yourself a vision for what you do want. Because you have to have something you're gonna move towards. Does that make sense? Without a vision, people perish. It says in a very good book called The Good Book. And I know there are many good books, but that's a good one to take a look at. We need something to go for. We can deal with any problem today as long as there's something that we can look for in the future that we can strive for. It'll give us the emotional and psychological fuel, the juice, to keep moving forward. So you gotta come up with a vision, and a way to do that, we'll call that step 4. Get a role model. You might get the vision from a role model, you might get the vision just from coming up with a new idea. But in order to figure out how to go from where you are to where you want to be, to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be, it's best to learn by other people's experience whenever you can. So get a role model, get their strategy, and go to work. Get into action. So I'll give you an example. Years ago, when I was first starting to try to figure out how to build myself financially, I grew up at a time when, just as I was starting to do well, this big recession happened. And I'll remember I was like 29, 30 years old, I think, and maybe 31. And I was doing okay. And then all of a sudden, there were all these business challenges because we went through this severe recession back in those days. And I remember at the time, everybody was downsizing and freaking out. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to just settle for this. I want to find a way to do well. Who's done well in really tough times? And so I started doing my homework. And in those days, you didn't go out and use the internet the way you do today. You couldn't access all that information. We actually went to libraries and did research in traditional ways. I'm ancient enough to remember those days. And I started hearing about this man named Sir John Templeton. Very famous man. He's a man who became a multi-billionaire as an investor. He started with nothing. But what was interesting is when I started to find out about his story, because here's a guy that when he's a young man, he's called Sir John Templeton now. He was actually an American originally. And he wasn't Sir. He came from a very poor family. And he just decided that in his life, He wanted to not only do well financially, he wanted to do so well he could help other people at any level that he wanted. And today, by the way, he's passed, but before he did, he created the Templeton Fund, and he also created a fund that now delivers money, gives money each year at the Templeton Prize to people that do good spiritual works, and it's larger than the Nobel Prize, and it continues to go on.